What if I told you that the fate of the world once rested on the decision of a single man trapped inside a submarine? Not a president, not a general, not even a king, just one exhausted naval officer sitting hundreds of feet beneath the Atlantic Ocean. And if he had made a different choice, the world you know today might not exist. No internet, no smartphones, no moon landing, possibly no civilization at all. Sounds like the plot of a Hollywood movie, but it almost happened. In October of 1962, the United States and the Soviet Union came closer to nuclear war than at any other point in human history. In our timeline, disaster was avoided. But today, we're rewriting history. Today, we're asking, what if the Cuban Missile Crisis escalated? To understand just how dangerous this scenario is, we need to go back to the Cold War. Now, despite the name, the Cold War wasn't exactly cold. The United States and the Soviet Union spent decades competing for influence across the globe. They built massive armies. They developed thousands of nuclear weapons. And they both became convinced that the other side was plotting their destruction. It was essentially the world's most dangerous staring contest. Then, in 1962, things got personal. American spy planes discovered Soviet nuclear missile sites under construction in Cuba. This was a major problem. Cuba sits only about 90 miles from Florida. For Americans, it felt like waking up one morning and finding your neighbor had parked a tank in your driveway. President John F. Kennedy demanded the missiles be removed. The Soviet Union refused. The world held its breath. American warships formed a blockade around Cuba. Nuclear bombers were placed on alert. Military commanders on both sides prepared for the possibility of war. For 13 days, humanity stood on the edge of the abyss. And then came October 27th, Black Saturday, the most dangerous day of the entire crisis. While politicians argued on the surface, another drama was unfolding beneath the ocean. A Soviet submarine known as B-59 was hiding underwater near the American blockade. The crew had lost contact with Moscow. The submarine was overheating. The sailors were exhausted. Some reports suggest temperatures inside approached unbearable levels. To make matters worse, American ships began dropping small practice depth charges nearby. The Americans intended these as warning signals. The Soviets had no idea. From inside the submarine, it sounded an awful lot like the beginning of World War III. Now here's where our timeline changes. In reality, the captain of B-59 considered launching a nuclear torpedo. Yes, a nuclear torpedo, because apparently the Cold War wasn't dangerous enough already. Fortunately, cooler heads prevailed. The launch was stopped, the submarine surfaced, and the crisis continued. But not today. In this timeline, the officers failed to convince the captain. The order is given. The torpedo launches. Minutes later, an American destroyer disappears in a blinding flash. Thousands of sailors witness the first use of a nuclear weapon since World War II. The Cuban Missile Crisis has officially become a shooting war. News reaches Washington within hours. Confusion erupts. Military leaders don't know if this attack was authorized by Moscow or carried out independently. What they do know is that an American ship has been destroyed by a Soviet nuclear weapon. Pressure immediately falls on President Kennedy. Military commanders demand action. Politicians demand action. The American public demands action. For Kennedy, every option is terrible. If he does nothing, America appears weak. If he retaliates, he risks starting World War III. After a tense emergency meeting, Kennedy makes his decision. American forces will launch airstrikes against Soviet missile sites in Cuba. The operation begins before sunrise. Hundreds of aircraft roar toward the island. Explosions light up the Cuban countryside. Radar stations vanish. Airfields burn. Missile launchers are reduced to smoking craters. For a brief moment, it appears the United States may have regained control of the situation. Then everything gets worse. Much worse. American intelligence had overlooked something important. The Soviets had secretly deployed tactical nuclear weapons to Cuba. Unlike the massive missiles capable of destroying entire cities, these weapons were designed for battlefield use. Smaller, faster, still absolutely terrifying. As American Marines begin landing on Cuban beaches, Soviet commanders face an impossible choice: retreat, surrender, or use the weapons they have been given. In our timeline, they never had to decide. In this one, they do. Nuclear weapons detonate across the invasion zones. Entire units disappear in seconds. Ships offshore are damaged. Thousands of troops are killed. For the second time in less than a week, nuclear weapons have been used. The world watches in horror. If there had been any hope of keeping the conflict contained, it vanishes in a mushroom cloud. Meanwhile, in Moscow, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev receives reports from Cuba. American aircraft are attacking. American troops are landing. Nuclear weapons have already been used. To Soviet leaders, it appears that the United States has chosen war. Across Europe, military forces begin mobilizing. NATO troops move toward defensive positions. Warsaw Pact armies prepare for offensive operations. Tank columns roll across highways. Fighter aircraft fill the skies. The largest military confrontation in history is beginning. The first major battles erupt in Germany. For years, both sides had planned for exactly this scenario, and now those plans become reality. The fighting is intense. Cities prepare air raid shelters. Families gather around radios. Governments issue emergency instructions. People everywhere begin asking the same question: is this the end? Then comes another crisis. A radar station mistakenly reports what appears to be an incoming nuclear attack. In the confusion of war, rumors spread faster than facts. Military commanders begin preparing retaliation plans. Missile crews receive orders. Bombers taxi onto runways. Submarines move into launch positions. For several horrifying hours, humanity stands one bad decision away from extinction. And yet, somehow, total nuclear war never comes. Both Kennedy and Khrushchev understand the stakes. Neither man wants to be remembered as the leader who ended civilization. Secret messages begin flowing between Washington and Moscow. The conversations are tense. The accusations are fierce. But beneath all the anger lies one undeniable truth. If either side launches everything, nobody wins. Not America, not the Soviet Union, not anyone. Weeks later, an uneasy ceasefire is finally reached. The guns fall silent. The missiles remain in their silos. Humanity survives. Barely. But survival comes at a terrible cost. Millions are dead. Large sections of Cuba have been devastated. Parts of Europe are scarred by nuclear warfare. Entire generations are traumatized. The world has witnessed something previously thought impossible: a nuclear war that did not destroy humanity, but came close enough. The political consequences are enormous. Around the world, people demand change. Massive anti-nuclear protests erupt across continents. Governments scramble to reduce tensions. The public no longer sees nuclear weapons as symbols of strength. They see them as instruments of madness. In the United States, Kennedy's legacy becomes one of the most debated in history. Some view him as the man who stood up to Soviet aggression. Others blame him for pushing the world too far. Across the Soviet Union, Khrushchev faces similar criticism. Both leaders become symbols of how close humanity came to disaster. Ironically, the limited nuclear war of 1962 may prevent a larger one later. Terrified by what they have witnessed, both superpowers begin reducing their nuclear arsenals years earlier than in our timeline. Arms control agreements arrive sooner. Nuclear testing declines dramatically. Countries around the world rethink their own nuclear ambitions. After all, the world has now seen exactly what these weapons can do, and it never wants to see it again. By the early 21st century, the world looks very different. The Cold War ends earlier. Nuclear stockpiles are smaller. International cooperation becomes stronger. Yet reminders of 1962 remain everywhere. Memorials stand where battles were fought. Museums preserve artifacts from the conflict. Survivors tell stories of the weeks that nearly changed everything. Students learn about the Cuban Missile Crisis the same way we learn about the World Wars, not as a close call, but as a catastrophe, a warning passed from one generation to the next, and perhaps That's the most chilling part of this entire story. Nothing here required a supervillain, no secret weapon, no impossible technology. Just one misunderstanding, one submarine, one launch order, one decision. In our timeline, humanity got lucky. In this one, luck finally ran out. Thank you for watching, and an extra special thank you if you liked and subscribed. We hope to see you again in the next episode of History Rewritten.